Hope you've had a good week, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here on 13 WMAZ Plus for a look at your extended forecast. We're going to break down all of the very busy events that we do have here in Central Georgia this weekend, give you an event-specific forecast, and go ahead and take a look at what's going on as we head into the work week next week, which will be the first full work week of November. And then we'll give you a check-in on the tropics. But this past work week, we've actually gotten a couple of days of some rainfall. Some of that rain actually has been fairly widespread in nature, but not necessarily too heavy, because you can see that at the most, this was this past Monday on the 27th of October, we got 3/4 of an inch of rain at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. We followed it up with 2 days later as our frontal boundary came through. It brought a pretty thin line of some light showers on through Central Georgia, and you can see that even those totals didn't get above 1/10 of an inch in nature. But 5 days throughout the entire month of October that we've recorded rainfall, and this is as of October 30th. No rain is in the forecast for Halloween, so I imagine we're going to hover right there on the line of the dry and very dry category for the month as a whole. So just shy of 1.5 inches of rain in the month of October, 1.43 inches to be exact. On our average, we typically see around 2.35 inches, so it is definitely a pretty dry month out of the calendar year, but we didn't even get enough rainfall to get up to that average mark that you do see. The record back in 1959, over 9 inches of rain. That would definitely have probably done some good, and that would really keep us out of any form of dry or drought conditions, which we will talk about here in a moment. But let's go ahead and talk about 2025 as a whole. The month of October hovering nearly an inch below where we should have been for the entire month. This marks the 5th red box that we will see in the calendar year of 2025. And also we have the nice offsetting amounts of those 5 green boxes. And really the reason that we continue to be above average has been due to the month of August itself. 6 inches above where we normally see in terms of rainfall on average in the month of August. So in total, we're still hovering just below 3 inches above where we should be at this point of the year. And that number has gone up a little bit. It was just below 2.5 inches as of last week. So this week's rainfall, not too bad, not terribly inefficient in terms of alleviating the dry conditions. And we'll continue to see how November and December round out the calendar year. Maybe numbers get back closer to average, or we get more of a cushion and continue to trend above average. So your drought monitor, we got that released this past Thursday, and very thankfully we didn't see any change. Now, of course, we want to see some changes and maybe get some of the drought conditions turning into abnormally dry areas, or some shades of no color that are going to indicate, of course, areas that haven't been abnormally dry. And we can find that back down to the east in Savannah, and as you get into coastal South Carolina, areas like Hilton Head, getting over to Beaufort. But here in Central Georgia, everyone is under moderate drought conditions still. Very thankfully, these didn't transition into a moderate drought. We still see that stands for our westernmost counties. So the rainfall was just enough to prevent the drought conditions from worsening. We'll see how this plays out as we go into next week's drought monitor, because we're not looking at terribly much in the way of rain chances as we go across this weekend. So here's a look at your Halloween evening forecast. Crystal clear, nothing to worry about in the way of cloud cover, nothing to worry about in the way of rain. And it still remains that way as we go all the way into Saturday morning here at 8 a.m., transitioning into the afternoon and evening hours. Some passing cloud cover could greet us right there around sunset time. Overall, it's not going to produce any rain, so any outdoor plans you have for Friday and you have for Saturday, they're looking good to go. Sunday's where we have a couple of question marks. We already are starting out with some cloud covers. You're making your way out the door to church. And then as we transition into Sunday afternoon, still dry here in Central Georgia, but a couple of scattered showers are already popping up into northeast Alabama, up into northwest Georgia. We can see that there's plenty of cloud cover down here in Central Georgia, so a mostly cloudy day, bringing back that gloomy atmosphere for the last day of the weekend. And then we will eventually see at least a couple of scattered shower chances into the evening and nighttime hours on Sunday, courtesy of a low pressure center that's going to creep down from the north and the northwest. If you look very closely, you can actually kind of see the counterclockwise rotation with some of these scattered showers. So the closer and closer that center of low pressure does creep into central Georgia, the better our rain chances are going to be. But we'll see how this scenario plays out. The model run before this only had a couple of sprinkles in our northernmost counties, but now it does look like some better coverage of the rain as we wrap up the weekend. I do anticipate these rain chances to really be after that time frame that you're already settling down past dinner time on Sunday and getting ready for the new work week that will begin on Monday. So your weekend outlook, we have a couple things to talk about with, of course, Halloween being on Friday. We'll talk about your trick-or-treat forecast and any of those nighttime plans that you may have. Obviously, Halloween falling on a Friday, many of you probably have your fair share of some weekend plans. Well, the morning low for Saturday morning, 37 degrees. 67 degrees is your high temperature through Halloween afternoon. We have to see those numbers drop 30 degrees before we walk out the door on Saturday morning. So your numbers are going to drop pretty quickly as we go into the evening and nighttime hours for Halloween. And they will do the same thing in between Saturday afternoon into Sunday morning, where you walk out to a morning low temperature of 40 degrees. But we also have something else that's very important this weekend. A time change will be occurring. Now, if you've been watching these extended forecasts for the past couple of weeks, we have already gone ahead and given you an early look at this time change, but now we are right on the cusp of it, and this is going to be our fall back period. So we are going to gain an extra hour of sleep, and we'll talk about when that time change specifically happens and what time the sun is going to begin to set and what time the sunrise will be after we get that time change going into Sunday morning. 68 degrees for a high temperature on Sunday, then a 20% chance of seeing a shower as we head into the evening hours. I do expect most of the day on Sunday to be rather dry, so it should be pretty good for some outdoor plans, especially if you go in the early afternoon time frame, just right there around lunchtime. Now taking a look at your trick-or-treat forecast, right there around 7 p.m., temperatures in the mid-50s already and going down into the low 50s as we go to 9 p.m. The later and later that you stay out, the cooler and cooler these numbers are going to get. Like I mentioned, we have to make it down to a morning low temperature in the upper 30s as you walk outside on Saturday morning. 52 degrees, still nearly 15 degrees above that morning low value, but it will be a clear night. So that's part of the reason why we do see the very quick cool down with your temperatures. We got the passage of our frontal boundary this past Wednesday. Took a while for some of that cooler and drier air to really take over, but the more and more, or the less and less that we have of cloud cover during those overnight hours, that will result in cooler temperatures. So cloud cover was actually our saving grace, believe it or not, for many mornings this past work week and kept your morning low temperatures somewhere in the low to mid 50s as opposed to well down into the 40s and the upper 30s, which we are anticipating on seeing for Saturday morning. So 9 p.m., 52 degrees, 10 p.m., I imagine you'll be closer to the 50-degree mark. This is going to be one of the coolest Halloweens that we've seen in nearly a decade. Now, not specifically for some of the high temperatures. You can see 64 degrees back in 2023. That was our lowest high temperature that we've seen over the past 10 years, but 67 degrees, that is definitely pretty close to some of these lower high temperatures that we've seen in recent years. And over the past 10 years, we also have seen our fair share of days record some rainfall on Halloween. Don't necessarily know why those boxes are popping up on days we didn't record rainfall in Halloween, but you can see 2022 that we recorded maybe about 1/10 of an inch of rain. So think about the rain we saw this past Wednesday. We only recorded about 8/100ths of an inch. So that's about the amount of rainfall we saw back in 2022. Only a few drops of rain in 2020. That's why we have the T over there indicated by a trace of rain, which is just a couple droplets that are not necessarily enough to equate to 1/10 of an inch of rain or even 100th of an inch of rain. The most rain we've seen on Halloween on October 31st in the past 10 years came back in 2019. We saw nearly a 1/2 inch of rain, so not a complete washout by any means. But there are a couple dates that stand out, and you can see back in 2018 and 19, we had a high temperature of 80 and 84 degrees, even 90 degrees back in 2016. Very thankful that we don't have the 90s in the forecast anymore. Yes, Halloween is going to be quite chilly in central Georgia this year. However, that gives you more of that fall feel, that kind of very appropriately feeling weather as we head into a pretty cool holiday and really marks the transition in that deep dive, or that dive off the deep end into the fall season. But here's a look at your morning low temperatures. 43 and 42 degrees at the lowest back in 2018 and 2019. And then we did see some mid and upper 40s back in 2020 and 2021. Most morning low temperatures are probably somewhere in the 50s, maybe even the 60s as we started out Halloween in 2022. Your morning low temperature of 39 degrees is already going to beat many of these temperature values. And we saw some feels like numbers that were pretty widespread in the upper 30s, as we did have a bit of a steady breeze present this past Halloween morning. So that's what I mean when I say one of the cooler Halloweens that we've seen over the past 10 years. And we're not going to have one of those Halloweens that we did record some rainfall like years of the past. But it also is Football Friday night, week 12 of Tailgate 13. And it will be the final week of Tailgate 13 as the regular season does come to a conclusion tonight, and then the playoffs will start in the next couple of weeks. So if you love Football Friday night, you can still tune in at 11:35 each and every Friday. We'll still be doing football highlights on Channel 13, but the Tailgate crew is only going to head out for one more time. They will be heading out to, I believe, just down the road here off Sherling Drive and Gray Highway. They will be going to the Northeast and East Lawrence matchup, just over to the east of the station. I cannot think of the stadium name off the top of my head. I'll have to go back and do some research. But what you should expect is temperatures still feeling pretty pleasant, maybe a little bit on the cooler side with plenty of sunshine around Tailgate. And then as you go into the start of games, and especially final score, that's where you're going to want to have the jacket readily available. Clear skies will lead to that very quick cool down hour by hour. Final score, 50 degrees, and you could very well see some upper 40s if your game goes a little bit later, or say you go into an overtime or two later on into the nighttime hours. And it's a big weekend here in the Southeast. The Dogs are back on the football field after a bye week last week. That is the last of the Georgia bye weeks until you start to get into SEC and conference championship season, and then you get into the games before, hopefully, the college football playoff for the Georgia Bulldogs. Well, the Dogs are squaring off in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party against the Florida Gators. I know, boo-hoo, I have the red and black tie on for a reason. Jacksonville, Florida is where the game will be taking place. So if you're planning on traveling south on 75 and taking a left turn and going on I-10 over to Jacksonville, what you need to know is around tailgate time, around the noon hour, you will start to steadily warm up. And Jacksonville in a more humid location and farther down to the south. So some warmer temperatures are expected in Jacksonville as opposed to up here in central Georgia. 67 degrees right there around tailgate time, going into 3:30 when kickoff will be. Actually, kickoff will probably be around 3:45. We know how long it takes for those ABC networks to really get into the start of games. They typically give you a cushion if the game before it does run over. But 72 degrees, maybe getting up to around 73 degrees for kickoff. And then as you're heading home around sunset, 64 degrees. So beginning the cool down back into the 60s. Sunset going to still be closer to the 7 p.m. hour, but a little bit earlier over in Jacksonville since they're a little bit farther to the east than us here in central Georgia. 6:38 p.m. is going to be when the sun does set down in Jacksonville. And the Falcons are out of town this weekend, but we do have a watch party going on at Luther Williams Field here in Macon. The Falcons, a little bit of Super Bowl PTSD with this matchup, squaring off against the New England Patriots, who are off to a pretty hot start this year, but so were the Buffalo Bills, and the Falcons did pull that upset. Not quite giving up on those Falcons just yet, but if you are planning on going out to Luther Williams Field to watch the game, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. is going to be when that watch party event is. Temperatures in the mid to upper 60s pretty consistently for the whole time that you're there. A tad bit chilly, and cloud cover will begin to increase the farther into the afternoon that you go. I think this event and the game will start to come to a conclusion before some possible rain enters the picture, but we very well could see that rain trend just a little bit earlier for the time that you're heading home. So maybe you want to plan on having the rain jacket handy at Luther Williams Field just in case you need it. And daylight saving time, I did mention that we are having a time change this weekend. Daylight saving time will be ending, so we will go without daylight saving time. We will go back to standard time all the way until we spring forward sometime in, I believe, the month of March. So the sunrise on November 2nd, which is going to be Sunday, will be around 6:53 a.m., back before the 7 a.m. hour. However, the only downside of this is your sunset is going to be before 6 p.m., even before 5:45. So you are going to notice a very early dusk hour time period. Official change is going to happen at 1:59 a.m. If you want to stay up, all the clocks that do this change automatically, they are going to go from 1:59 all the way back to 1 a.m. But then eventually after you make that time change, they will go throughout the rest of the night accordingly to 2, 3, and eventually 4 a.m. into the early morning. So this fallback means that you're sacrificing the later sunsets, but you are getting an extra hour of sleep. So many of you are going to wake up on Sunday morning feeling extra refreshed and relaxed and recharged, as you will get an hour of sleep. So many of you do look forward to this for the aspect that you get an extra hour of sleep. But then after that, for the next couple of months, is going to be a bit of a gloomy scene, and you're not really going to remember that extra hour of sleep anymore, because by the time you are heading home from work, maybe some after-school activities each and every day, the sunset is going to be earlier. And the other side of that is, with an earlier sunset, your temperatures get cooler a lot earlier in the night. So 5:42, that already seems like way too early of a sunset. In fact, it's not even the earliest sunset that we have. That goes to December 1st, where the sun will set at 5:27 p.m., so before the 5:30 half hour, and indicating another day where we have roughly around 10 hours of daylight. So as we go into Sunday, we will have just under 11 hours of daylight. We already have just under 11 hours of daylight. But the shortest day of the calendar year, that goes to December 21st, where we'll have just shy of 10 hours of daylight here in central Georgia. Sunrise, going to continue to get later and later, all the way to 7:33 in the morning on December 21st. And sunset will be a little bit later than that December 1st date at 5:32 p.m., but 9 hours and 59 minutes of daylight is what is expected on December 21st, which is an important date. That is the winter solstice. That marks the beginning of the winter season here in the southeast, really all across the United States. The northern hemisphere is where it will mark the beginning of the winter season, and that date will also in turn act as the beginning of summer for the southern hemisphere. So areas like Australia, going into South Africa, South America, all those areas are going to be in their summer season, which is definitely probably what some of you will be wishing for, with some morning low temperatures like this on your pumpkin picking forecast. I still think both Saturday and Sunday are going to be good days to go out to the pumpkin patch. You see your rain chance on Sunday down to about a 10% compared to the 20% I had on the weekend outlook, because I imagine by the time many of these pumpkin patches are closing down for the day on Sunday, the rain chances are still going to be out in somewhere in northern Georgia. So I imagine you don't really have a good likelihood of encountering rain throughout your Saturday and Sunday afternoon plans. But as you transition into Sunday evening, that's when we have some better rain chances. And for your weekend grillcast, I still think it's green spatulas all the way through Friday into Sunday. Sunday may be a day that you want a little bit of caution, but I think that's the farther north that you live. So just be on the lookout. Utilize that live radar tool that we have on a constant loop here on 13 WMAZ Plus before heading out to the grill, just to see if any showers are in the near vicinity, if you plan on having an end of the weekend grill out to wrap up a very eventful weekend. And now taking a look at your pickleball forecast, going to be chilly out there in the kitchen. Cool but clear on Friday, and then as you go into Saturday, still lots of sunshine. High temperatures are still only expected in the upper 60s. And yes, relative to how we have been feeling with high temperatures in the upper 50s this past week, this is going to feel a little bit warmer, but maybe a bit chilly for your liking. May want to have a long sleeve t-shirt or maybe even a hoodie ready to go as you're heading outside. And then Sunday going to be the gloomier of those days, and still a high temperature in the upper 60s. However, if you are planning on playing pickleball, say Sunday evening, that's where you could run into your fair share of a rain chance. But keep that in mind if you have plans to play pickleball on Monday as well. The courts might still be a tad bit wet. So my recommended weekend attire for your afternoons, I think it's kind of that long sleeve t-shirt weather, but of course you're going to want the sunglasses, especially Friday and Saturday. Then as you go into the mornings and the evenings, you'll want some form of layering, whether that's your favorite quarter zip, whether that's your favorite hoodie, whether that's just your favorite jacket that has some really good fleece insulation or such, because the temperatures down in the 50s and eventually well down into the 40s are not going to be something that you want to be outside in, say, short sleeves and a short sleeve t-shirt and maybe even some shorts. But now let's pick it up at the beginning of the work week next week. It looks like rain chances are already trying to get out of here by Monday morning. We'll see if that comes to fruition. I still have a rain chance for the early morning part of Monday, but the consensus is by the time we roll into Election Day on next Tuesday, I think it's still going to be clear skies, maybe a few clouds here and there from the moment the polls open, from the moment the polls close later on into the evening hours just past when you end work on Tuesday. Some passing cloud cover as we go into Wednesday, but then we clear back out for Thursday and eventually into the end of the work week next week, where we do start to see maybe a few scattered shower chances around us, and then a frontal boundary that may be taking shape over to the west of us. That's still way out in the future. It looks like we're not going to have much in the way of rain besides that Sunday evening period all the way into the first part of your Monday as it stands right now. So your morning low temperatures, they actually are going to feel a little bit better. We're not talking about some upper 30s like we're talking about for Halloween morning and the first day of November on Saturday. 42 for a morning low Monday and Tuesday. So if you have plans to go out to the polls, cast your ballot and make your vote before you go to work, that's where you're going to want to have a jacket handy. But 41 for a morning low on Wednesday, then into a warm up as we head into Thursday, morning low temperature of 45 degrees, which is still below average, but it's a lot closer to average, say, than 37 degrees, which we have in store for your Saturday morning. Afternoon high temperatures, upper 60s for one more day on Monday, and then a welcome back to the 70s, even above average as we go into next Thursday. So it does look like a warmer spell is on the horizon. But let's go ahead and look past that window. How about your 8 to 14 day temperature outlook, valid from November 7th all the way into November 13th. So that's going to be next Thursday, I do believe. Election day is on the 4th, 5th, 6th. This is going to be next Friday, so had to do a quick mental math train right there, but it does look like we have a slight probability of above normal temperatures. It looks like the 70s are going to be here to stay for your extended forecast, and along with that, that means that we're probably not going to receive much in the way of rain. It's going to be a relatively dry and clear stretch of weather as we head into the first half of the month of November, even a slight probability of below normal amounts of precipitation. But still, this is kind of right there around what the precipitation outlook looked like as of last week. So that what came to fruition was kind of this time period that we're settling into now, Halloween all the way into the beginning of next week. And I didn't show you much in the way of impressive rain chances whatsoever. So that's not going to be good for our drought conditions. However, it is going to be a very nice stretch of weather to getting in any outdoor plans that you may have. So looking ahead, we now have some new dates to keep in mind. Election Day in 4 days, that will be occurring next Tuesday. Veterans Day will be exactly a week after that, the following Tuesday. That may be a random Tuesday that many school districts have as a holiday, so many of your kids may go to school on Monday, have random Tuesday off, and then they'll finish out the rest of the school week Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So go ahead and keep that in mind if you need to schedule a babysitter. And Thanksgiving happening in 27 days. That is hard to believe we're coming up on Thanksgiving. But of course, as we get into Halloween, then we start to look ahead to the next holiday. And once we get to Thanksgiving, we'll go ahead and start looking ahead to Christmas. Many of you are probably already looking ahead to Christmas, like myself. And then Black Friday, just one day after Thanksgiving. Many of you probably trying to get an early jump on some of that Christmas shopping. But if not, Black Friday is an important date because the dogs and the jackets will be squaring off in some clean, old-fashioned hate up at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That's going to be a big-time matchup, maybe even a top 5 matchup as we go across the next month of college football. And an average, or a look at your average peak fall foliage. Okay, there we go. I can actually talk. Now we're looking at Central Georgia. Mid-November is when we're really going to start to see those leaves change. If you're a little impatient, you want to see those leaves change a little bit earlier, take a trip up to the North Georgia mountains where they're already seeing that peak fall foliage happen in real time. And then in the next week or two, we should expect some peak fall foliage creeping close to Central Georgia, but maybe just taking a trip up to, say, Piedmont Park in Atlanta, getting into the Piedmont region of the entire state of Georgia. They should start to see those leaves turn those beautiful yellow, red, and orange colors. So Hurricane Melissa, that has been a hot topic over the past week or so here in Central Georgia. Here's where it currently stands. As of this past Friday morning, post-tropical Melissa now, because it's moved across a certain level of latitude. So you obviously see the winds 85 miles per hour. Those are still Category 1 hurricane force winds. And it's actually already moved past the island of Bermuda, which we were thinking about way out into the future. It was going to have implications there. Well, you can see it's moved past Bermuda already because of this. Take a look at your 11 a.m. advisory. It is moving to the northeast at not 10 miles per hour, not 20 miles per hour, 48 miles per hour. Melissa could get a speeding ticket very well right now. Pressure is up to 973 millibars, so it will continue to weaken as it moves into this cooler Atlantic water that is closer up to the North Pole. But right now it's directly over to the east of states like Delaware and New Jersey, getting up into New York, and it will continue to move up into the North Atlantic Ocean over the next couple of days. Here's a look at a couple of timestamps into the future. It may have some impacts over here in eastern Canada where you do see St. John's. I believe that is the province of Newfoundland, possibly. Not really familiar with my Canadian geography, but still nonetheless, no impacts here to the United States. And as we transition into the weekend, it is already in the North Atlantic Ocean by Sunday evening, 60-mile-per-hour winds. And then as you go all the way into the beginning of next week, Melissa still has a lifespan, 40-mile-per-hour winds next Tuesday afternoon. And it's getting really close to impacting not England, not Ireland, but Iceland, up there where you do see the label of Reykjavik. So of course this is going to move into that cooler water associated with those islands like Greenland and Iceland that are naturally in a bit of a cooler climate. Very beneficial to not see Melissa having any more impacts, because Melissa has made 2 landfalls and it's had some pretty drastic impacts. In fact, in a historic storm, when it did make its first landfall at 1 p.m. this past Tuesday in New Hope, Jamaica. Sustained winds of 185 miles per hour. Now, what that word sustained means is that's what the winds are consistently blowing at. Your occasional gusts that can be a little bit higher than that, they got over 200 miles per hour, especially on the top of some of those mountains that you do have across the terrain of Jamaica. Minimum pressure, 892 millibars. So we were just talking about the pressure with Melissa. It stands below 1,000 millibars, somewhere around 973 millibars. We've seen nearly a 100 millibar increase over the course of the last couple of days. And the higher the pressure goes, that means that the weaker the storm gets. But the lower the pressure goes, the stronger the storm gets. So 185 mile per hour winds, that was good enough for high-end Category 5 status that impacted the western portion of Jamaica near Black River, and eventually it did make its way up to the Montego Bay area in northwest Jamaica. Devastating impacts. Those aren't words that we use lightly here as meteorologists. We're certainly sending our thoughts and prayers, and of course, obviously going to try to find any way that we can help out these nations in the Northern Caribbean. But Melissa wasn't done after impacting Jamaica, unfortunately. Just a couple hours later, not even 24 hours later, at 3 a.m. in the morning on Wednesday, it impacted southern Cuba, just to the west of Guantanamo and Guantanamo Bay, near Chivirico, Cuba, and Santiago de Cuba, still as a major hurricane. I know I have the Category 5 icon over there, but it did impact southern Cuba as a Category 3 storm, still with 120 mile per hour winds, but that pressure did get a pretty good increase. That's actually closer to the current pressure that Melissa does continue to have, and it didn't move over too many land masses as it crossed Jamaica and southern Cuba. However, the terrain of both these areas is very mountainous, so it did lead to a pretty good weakening with Melissa until it finally got into some of that cooler Atlantic water where it does currently stand. But southern Cuba and Jamaica definitely felt the brunt of the force when it came to Hurricane Melissa, and then eventually it made its way into the southeast Bahamas. Very thankfully didn't make a landfall, but of course you don't need the storm to go directly over you in order to see some pretty drastic impacts of tropical nature. So in the year of 2025, as of October 31st, as of Halloween, 13 named storms are what we have seen in the Atlantic Basin. One storm below what we see on average of 14. Colorado State forecast is 17 for us this year, so we're still a couple storms below that number. We've now seen 5 hurricanes in in the Atlantic hurricane season, so still below our average, and 4 hurricanes below what Colorado State forecasted of us of 9, and then major hurricanes. This is the most shocking thing. A lot of the hurricanes that have formed have been very strong. We have seen 4 major hurricanes of Category 3 or higher status, so that goes above average and exactly what Colorado State did forecast for us. And 3 out of those 4 major hurricanes did reach Category 5 status, the latest being Melissa, adding on to Hurricane Humberto and Hurricane Aaron, which kind of went up the eastern seaboard of the United States. So obviously it has been quite the hurricane season thus far, but we're really heading into the last month of hurricane season where we don't see a lot of tropical activity. I don't anticipate those numbers to get but maybe 1 or 2 higher than what they're currently sitting at. But of course, we'll continue to keep an eye out on the tropics, as tropical formation is definitely not impossible in this last month of hurricane season, but it is a whole lot less likely. So that was a lot to cover with your extended forecast. Hopefully you are staying informed and you kind of know what to wear, and you're readily available, keeping that coat, keeping that jacket, keeping that beanie maybe, even to just keep you warm as we go across the course of this weekend. But going to be a series of cool and chilly mornings and evenings, but the afternoon should feel a little bit more pleasant, maybe some long sleeve t-shirt weather. But other than that, we will finally bring back the 70s as we head into next week. Doesn't look like we have too much rain on the horizon, but we'll continue to keep our fingers crossed that we can get maybe a day or two of rain, and then we can see conditions clear out. So hopefully we have the best of both worlds, helping out the drought monitor, and then of course clearing out for any outdoor plans. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you at 11 a.m. coming up on Monday.